Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to our second Barrel Club virtual experience. So it is December 9th, we're officially allowed to say it. Happy Christmas, and we're delighted that you could join us. And a very special welcome to all of our new members to your first taste of our Barrel Club selection. So my name is Tommy Byrne, I'm the tutor and the International Whisky Ambassador at the Irish Whisky Academy. Believe it or not, this is not a virtual background behind me. I am actually standing here in the micro distillery, which is within the grounds of the old Midleton distillery. And tonight, we're going to take you on a journey through distillation, and specifically pot still distillation, which is regarded as the quintessential style of Irish whisky. So we have a really great lineup for you this evening. Over the next hour and a half or so, as we taste each of the 5 whiskies in your pack, you're going to have an opportunity to meet some of the makers here at Midleton, including our master distiller, Kevin O'Gorman, who's back again with us. Now, I hope you're in a comfortable chair, ideally with a friend or two around, and some water to sip on as we progress, because we do want you to enjoy this tasting responsibly. I mentioned 5 whiskies, so to toast 2021 and to celebrate its recent launch, we wanted to gift you a sample of Jameson 21 Years. And also a big congratulations to those of you who got your hands on a bottle in the ballot. If you didn't, fear not. Tonight we have 1 bottle to give away to a lucky member tuned in tonight. There's going to be a bit of a competition. I'll give you more details on that later on. So if you do have any questions you'd like to ask us tonight, please just pop them into the Q&A and we'll get to as many as possible. So now I'm going to walk you down by the stills and I'm going to introduce you to the lady who's responsible for creating all of the innovative whiskies here at the micro distillery. Eva O'Doherty, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Tommy. I'm very well. How are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for welcoming us into the micro distillery tonight.
No, I'm delighted. I'm excited to be here tonight, to be with yourself and the guys live from the micro where I work, so I'm delighted.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, I suppose to get the ball rolling, can you tell us a little bit about your role, I suppose, within Irish Distillers?
Yeah, so for everyone working, watching tonight, firstly, welcome to the micro distillery. My name is Eva O'Doherty, and I'm the distiller here in the micro distillery. So this is actually where I work every day, so you get a sneak peek of behind the scenes now tonight. So I am the distiller here, so I look after the operation and maintenance of the micro distillery. We have a number of pots here. We have 3 whiskey stills and 1 gin still. So there's always something new and exciting happening here in the micro, and no day is the same. That's what I love about it so much down here. Every day is so diverse.
I'm sure for a lot of people listening tonight, that sounds like a dream job. I'm sure they're very jealous. So I suppose we're in the micro distillery. Can you tell us a little bit about its role within the wider Midleton distillery?
Yeah, so just a bit of background on the micro distillery. It was built in 2015 and commissioned in 2016. Its main functions are innovation, education and experimentation. It's where our graduates come and learn the art of distillation, because I'm sure if anyone had the pleasure of coming to the micro distillery, if you look around, there's a lot of levers, valves, pressure gauges around, and the reasoning for this is the micro distillery is all manually operated. So in comparison to our main distillery, where they heavily rely on automation through the use of our SCADA system, down here we really rely on the process and knowledge and also our senses. The senses play a huge part here in the micro distillery. That's what's so exciting. Every single sight, smell, sound, taste, we rely on to carry out our daily operations. For examples, when we're taking down our charges of wash, the lovely aroma that fills the micro distillery full of those banana esters, it's great. Likewise, when a distillate is flowing through our safe here behind me, we'll get to know when we're going to make a cut, when it's about to boil in, and likewise even sight. If we're starting up our still, our wash still has sight glasses, so if there was any foaming that would occur throughout a boil out, we'd be able to watch it and see and assess. So it's a really exciting place. It's very hands-on.
Yeah, so it's a really hands operation.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to hide here.
That's it.
And you mentioned the Distillery Safe, so I suppose this is a really critical tool for you in the distillation process, particularly when it's so hands-on like this.
Yeah, so this is our Distillery Safe, so this is our pride and joy. This plays a huge role in terms of innovation for us. I work very closely with Catherine Condon, who you'll meet later on. She's a distiller in the main distillery above, and we will work here and bounce off each other to create new ideas and come up with basically creative whiskies and really try and push the boundaries. The micro distillery is really our playground in terms of innovation. So the two of us will be here and assess our distillate live as it's flowing through our safe and can determine whether we're going to make our cuts, and then for future distillations, how we're going to make our cuts and really just push those boundaries.
Yeah. I think your job's sounding better and better by the minute. So you mentioned obviously innovation plays a big part, and probably a lot of people instantly think of casks and different wood types when it comes to innovation, but like you mentioned, it actually comes right back to the spirit as well.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that you can be innovative around your whiskey. So number one would be your mash bill, so that's the cereal type you're using. Number two would be your distillation technique, whether you're doing pot still distillation, column stills, double or triple. And then the third main way of being innovative is obviously your maturation. What sort of casks you're going to use, if you're going to recask, and for how long they're going to be in these casks. So there's these three perimeters that you can play around with. And the easiest way I always describe it is if myself and yourself, Tommy, started off with a simple mash bill of malted and unmalted barley, and we both came into the micro distillery and spent a day distilling here, and we both chose casks separately, I'm sure we'd have two different whiskies at the end of the week. But it just shows you that from starting with the same starting material, there's a huge, big expansion there in terms of innovation to play around with. So it's incredible.
I like how you didn't say which one would be the better whiskey. That was very, very diplomatic. So I suppose, like, we're working our way through the whiskey making journey. We're starting off with spirit, and I know you want to do a bit of a comparison between spirit and actual mature whiskey.
Yes. So this first sample that we have here tonight, this is a new make spirit. So this is a spirit, like I was saying, that would be flowing through the safe that myself and Catherine will be assessing. So as you can see in colour, it is fairly clear. So most of the colour comes from maturation. There'll be no colour addition throughout the distillation. So you'll see when we compare it to our sample in a second, the colour difference. Yeah,
absolutely.
So even to nose this, you get those lovely fruity notes.
Really fruity, because I think a lot of people probably assume when they see it's clear, think like it's going to be like a vodka or something.
Yeah, no, you get those lovely, almost like esters coming through from your wash from the start. So this is just a traditional pot still barley, but a new make spirit, so it hasn't been aged yet.
Yeah, really fruity. Yeah, so you're starting off with a good foundation of flavour.
That's it, yeah. And that leads nicely on now to our Method Madness single pot still.
Absolutely, folks. So this is a perfect opportunity to start the first tasting of the night. So this is the 70 cl feature bottle in your December drop. So it's the Method of Madness single pot still French chestnut. So Eva, please tell us a bit more about this whiskey.
Yeah, I'll be delighted to take you through tasting tonight. So this is our Method Madness single pot still Irish whiskey that was aged in ex-Oloroso sherry and ex-American bourbon barrels, and then finished in a French chestnut for 12 months. So I know pre-COVID, Kevin and Billy had the privilege of going to our cooperage in France, Signan Maru, and they worked closely with the guys there to create a first for us, and a first for us in the Method and Madness range. Before I begin, I'll just give you a bit of backstory on pot still whiskey. So a pot still whiskey would consist of a mash bill of malted and unmalted barley that has been triple distilled in copper pot stills and matured in a variety of casks. We're very lucky here in Ireland that we get to play around with a variety of casks. So likewise, the French chestnut for us was an incredible experience. So before we even begin the nosing, I just want to comment on the colour again in comparison to our new make. You get that lovely deep mahogany colour that's coming right through from the French chestnut. So it's incredible the impact that it can have on our final distillate. Yeah. So if everyone would like to nose first. Oh yeah.
Wow, yeah, such a full-bodied nose, isn't it? Beautiful.
Yeah, it's delicious if I do say so myself. Yeah. It's lovely and sweet. You get those lovely butterscotch, almost toffee-like notes coming through.
Really sweet, yeah.
And almost like a gingery spice coming through also.
Yeah, even a bit of kind of licorice kind of there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
I don't know, everyone is probably sick of us talking.
Everyone's very thirsty now, yeah.
It's thirsty work, so first one, so sláinte everyone.
Sláinte, folks.
Oh yeah, that is very, very nice. You get that lovely sweetness that what you would expect from the French chestnut to come through, and that lovely long woody finish. And you do get that cereal note towards the end from the distillate.
Bit of kind of banana there, and
yeah, coming through. It's fantastic whiskey for us, and we're so proud of it, especially with French chestnut because it was a first for us. A bit about the French chestnut. It is from Signan Maru, that is the cooperage we were dealing with in France. And it's Castaneva sativa, that is the wood type. So we were very worried about this because it has a low density and high porosity. So we were afraid in case we would get a lot of leaking and seeping from barrels. But we were actually very lucky because the cooperage that we were dealing with, in fairness, they were fantastic. They had lovely thick staves that we were used to create our barrels. So we're very lucky that we barely had any losses. That's what one of our main concerns was. But it's a fantastic whiskey.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really shines through, doesn't it? The chestnut is so
the colour of it is very striking, especially if you compare to our other Method Madness single grain or single malt. The colour difference in this is just astonishing. Like, it really catches your eye. Yeah,
you can pick up the kind of the tannins on the palate and stuff.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you get like a puckering almost in your mouth. That is the dryness that comes through from the tannins in the French chestnut. Yeah.
That's interesting. You mentioned there it's Segun Moreau, so they supplied us with the actual chestnut cask.
Yeah, they're in the south of France. So pre-COVID, I know Billy and Kevin went over, so they would be able to tell you more. But they had a fantastic time over there catching up with the guys.
No doubt, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And also selecting our barrels. So yeah, it's very important for us because cask innovation is a really important factor in terms of innovation, especially here in the micro distillery.
Absolutely. Well, look, that was a really nice insight into the micro distillery. Thanks. And what an amazing whiskey to start with, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. Now it is competition time, which I'm sure is going to excite a lot of people. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, you will have the opportunity to get your hands on a bottle of Jameson 21-year-old. And the power is in Eva's hands. Eva, I believe you have a question for everyone tonight.
Yes, so your competition question for tonight is, from the 1st of January 2021 to November 30th, 2021, how many litres of alcohol were produced here in the micro distillery? So it's a tough enough question.
Yeah, get a pen and paper and a calculator out there, see if you can work that out. So if anyone does have an answer, folks, please do pop one into the chat. You know, you might as well enter, and we'll announce the winner a little bit later on tonight. Thanks, Eva.
No problem.
So, folks, Midleton Distillery plays a huge role in the whole story of Irish whiskey. And to find out more, who better to ask than the man who is so intrinsically linked with the buildings here and, of course, the whiskies themselves. I'm talking about our Master Distiller Emeritus, Mr. Barry Crockett.
Well, the story of Irish whiskey in terms of its expansion and contraction, it's a long story, but if we just say start off in the 1870s, 1880s, it was already beginning to come under a certain degree of strain at that stage, largely as a result of the introduction of grain whiskey, which of course the Irish never accepted. And eventually, effectively what happened was that as you moved into the 20th century, and particularly due to I suppose political and economic circumstances, Ireland came under a lot of, pressure, and the Irish distilling industry equally fell foul to a degree to the economic circumstances. Ireland was very depressed in the 1920s, 1930s, and it wasn't really until the mid-50s or onwards that it began to come back up out of that again. And now, of course, there were a lot of other stories as well, such as the introduction of prohibition in America. But even if that had never happened, there were difficulties in Ireland anyway. As regards the numbers of distilleries, of course, there were, I think, about 70 distilleries or more than that. In fact, 70 major distilleries, shall we say, in the latter part of the 19th century. But by the middle of the 20th century, 1954-55, there were really four distilleries left. You had the one here in Midleton, four major distilleries. You had the one in Midleton. You had the obviously Jameson in Bow Street, John's Lane, that was the Powers Distillery, and of course you had Bushmills up in the north of Ireland. Those are the four main distilleries. But even those are working at a very, very low level of activity.
Absolutely fascinating. I could definitely listen to Barry talk all evening, and you will hear from him a little bit later, folks. So many of you will probably know that Barry was actually born in the Distiller's Cottage, which is just one of the many impressive buildings which we have on site here in Midleton. And your Barrel Club membership actually includes a complimentary ticket to a behind-the-scenes experience here at Midleton. And in that tour, you'll get to see some of these old buildings, which will actually soon enjoy an upgrade as part of an exciting redevelopment plan, which was just announced last week. But fear not, the guided tours and experiences will continue. Now, if you're closer to Dublin, you can join a Jameson Black Barrel blending class in the Jameson Distillery on Bow Street in Smithfield. So please join us if you haven't already done so. And we'll actually be sending out an email with a reminder on how to redeem very, very soon. So now I would like to introduce you to our panel for this evening. So we do have Eva, who you've already met. So welcome back down, Eva.
Thank you.
We also have Catherine Condon, who is also responsible for distillation here at the distillery. We have Mr. Derek King, who is the brand ambassador responsible for our Powers range of whiskies. And of course, we have Kevin O'Gorman, our master distiller. So welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, Tommy.
And great to see you. So tonight, folks, we're going to have the chats, and no doubt we'll have a little bit of crack along the way too. The guys here are, they're here to answer any questions you might have around the whiskies that we're going to be tasting, but about anything else for that matter too. So this is your chance. Please do pop any questions into the Q&A. So after visiting the Johns Lane Distillery, which is just off Thomas Street in Dublin in the mid-1880s, author Alfred Barnard said, "The distillery altogether is about as complete a work as it is possible to find anywhere." Now that's high praise for such a great operation, which is distilling some truly sublime whiskies. And the man tasked with spreading the word and, of course, the love of Powers is next up. So, Mr. Derek King, good evening, sir.
How are you, Tommy? All right?
I'm great, thanks. Welcome to the Micro Distillery.
Thanks very much. Chuffed.
Yeah. So, Derek, we're hoping tonight you can tell us a little bit more about Powers. I suppose, why is Powers made here in Midleton now as opposed to Dublin, where it was traditionally made? And, of course, we're hoping you'll be able to tell us about the wonderful Powers Tree Swallow Lease, where we're going to be tasting later on.
Absolutely. So I think Barry made my job a little bit easier there than it should be. He kind of hit the nail on the head with all of the factors that kind of, I guess, influenced the demise of Irish whiskey, unfortunately. And, lots of distilleries would have suffered at the time, and Powers didn't escape that net either. The distillery that Alfred would have visited would become a lot more kind of, I guess, fell into disrepair to a great degree.
From the highs to the lows, yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I guess two main factors, and one, like the one I'm touching on, everything inside would have been at one point cutting edge. He described it as we see on the screen, and everything was efficient. It was aesthetic. The workers were kind of front and fore of everything that was being done, but Powers could not afford the upkeep of such a distillery. It had become a whiskey village in itself inside four walls. Huge real estate in the Liberties, but the money just was not there due to what Barry touched on, and they just simply could not afford to keep all of this equipment running as they would have. So essentially, the distillery became a liability to all the people that were working there inside, and it just was no longer fit for purpose, really. Which is very unfortunate. And I guess another big factor was the initial distillery would have been, as Midleton once was, on a greenfield site, and it was kind of ready for expansion, and they did exactly that. I mean, they grew this distillery to almost 7 acres. It was producing huge amounts of alcohol in the mid-1800s. But where this went, the cobblestones of Dublin just weren't suitable. Yes, they could take the horses, the carriages, the carts, etc. Yeah. But the lorries, the trucks, and the tankers that modern distillation required, unfortunately, it just was not able to.
Such a big operation in the modern city centre doesn't really work anymore, unfortunately.
It's huge, and it's in a very interesting part of Dublin, of course, and it's still, the Liberty still trades away. There still is kind of the remains of the markets. The old markets are still there, and this would have been really a buzzing hive at the time. One of the first jobs, interesting enough, that was done in the morning in the Johns Lane Distillery was obviously first impressions were very important to the Powers family, and the first job was to wash the pats at the front of 108 Thomas Street, the facade that leads onto the road, and it still remains the same today. It's now, unfortunately, it's not the buzzing distillery that it once was. You won't get those lovely smells in the air. It's a lot of students milling around because, of course, it is NCAD at the moment. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think if you were to ask 90% of these people, they probably wouldn't know where they're studying at the moment. They wouldn't know what it was in a previous life. But still a lovely place to go. The pots still sit there. They're in probably somewhat disrepair, tarnished green with weather now. And one of the first questions you're always asked when you do take groups in there is, were they exposed to the elements as they are now? The answer is no. They would have been housed in a still house, of course. Really, really nice still house. Some of the archive imagery we see of it, very, very impressive. So it's Powers steeped in history. I think anyone that touches the brand in any capacity, it's a brand that you fall in love with. Mm-hmm. The stories are endless, and they very much were, you know, Powers, the people were important, the whiskey obviously very, very important, because they really felt that what they were producing was the best around as such. Yeah.
And of course, some of the logos, I see you've got your diamond P on your lapel there. I mean, that's such a kind of an iconic.
The diamond P, I don't leave home without it.
So that's always a good sign.
As cheesy as it sounds, I remember getting that diamond P. I was, you know, thrilled in the job a couple of years now. And the good thing with Powers is I think the expressions, again, make the job a little bit easier for you, because they do the talking. John's Lane, of course, is homage to the distillery, and I guess the industrious ambition, really, the drive that Powers had. And, you know, they went through the glory days with such ambition. And, you know, to be able to kind of, I guess, carry whiskies like this in the armoury, the portfolio is pretty small. My arsenal is pretty small, but it's a damn fine
Packs
one.
a punch.
It certainly does.
Yeah,
it certainly does, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, I suppose that's the perfect lead into, I mean, the whiskey we're going to try tonight, folks, is the Powers 3 Swallow release. I mentioned the Diamond P. I mean, the 3 Swallows were also, you know, huge as icons of the Powers brand.
Both big, I guess, logos or motifs for Powers. The Diamond P was one of the first registered trademarks in Ireland, 1877. It was registered, and nothing would have escaped the distillery without having a Diamond P somewhere printed on it. You know, even these Diamond Ps would have presented themselves as red ribbon and kind of brass Diamond Ps. Some of them still up in the archives, and Carol has been monumental for me, you know, learning the ins and outs of Powers. It's great to have an advocate like Carol on board as well, of course. But the 3 Swallow expression, an amazing whiskey, a relatively young pot still, but I think what it's managed to do for itself is find a nice place amongst the up-and-coming whiskey anoraks or connoisseurs that, you know, want that kind of gateway whiskey into, you know, some of the bigger whiskies or the bigger complexities we have on the barrels tonight. So I think it serves a lovely purpose. It's quite approachable. It's quite easy. I don't think it demands too much thinking. It's a lovely kind of, I guess, to give it an occasion, it's a lovely sipper. Mm-hmm. Regularly, I'm asked when I sit with groups about what's my favourite between John's Lane and 3 Swallow, and it's almost like, you know, picking your favourite son or daughter. It really is. I think they both have their own occasion. They're both very special in their own right, but delighted to be tasting 3 Swallow. I think for me, it's the story behind it. I'll touch on that in a minute, but I think if you want to get stuck in and have a little nose, why not?
That's good.
So I think I'm accused regularly of being very biased towards Powers, of course, as well. It's definitely a habit. But this one for me is I think you'll go a long way before you'll find a nose that kind of, you know, stands with this so lovely. This, I think all of the elements of what we smell really hold hands with each other. It's, you know, there's a lovely sweetness to it. There's a lovely freshness. I think kind of that lovely orchard fruit freshness steps aside from, I think, what those regular Powers expressions do in the spice delivery. I think this holds back a little bit. Spice for me is kind of progressive here, but the sweetness is, and you know, we all hear such ridiculous notes thrown out, but there's a lovely kind of marzipan, almost confectionery marshmallow there. It's that lovely sweetness.
Really get that.
And
sorry, I just say to folks as well, if you're picking up any specific notes, aromas, taste, please throw them in the chat as well.
And that classic green banana we chatted on earlier on, it is kind of, I guess, fired from the hip quite regularly, but for me, I definitely imagine that unripe banana. It's just, it's very prominent there on the nose.
It jumps out of the glass, yeah, beautiful.
So cheers, we'll have a
launch it, folks.
Good mouthful of that one. Again, I just think it's so subtle in its approach. I mean, the spice has kind of presents itself a little bit different. It nearly dances across your palate versus that kind of robust delivery from your Gold labels or your John's Lane. But I think it's all married so well. There's a lovely sweetness there. It all kind of, like I always say, it kind of holds hands and sits away on your palate so lovely. It's very, very balanced. And
I'm sure any of the distillers here, I mean, Powers has that, you know, real specific spirit style. It's, you know, it's full of flavour and robust, but it's still so silky and, you know, such an easy drinker as well.
Yeah, as a distillate-driven brand, you know, you say you're biased, but I'll back you as well there.
Well, yeah,
I will.
happy days.
I think we're all fans, aren't we?
Yeah, it's so lovely. It's one, like I said, I'm so happy to be able to give people, and I think I'm really specific with when we talk to groups about, you know, John's Lane is an amazing whiskey, of course, and I know there's really good news coming about John's Lane as well in the next drop. But 3 Swallow, I think is just one of those lovely whiskies we talked earlier on about sharing whiskey, and that's what it's there for. And I think this is just a lovely bottle to be able to pass around to people. I think there's not too many noses that will be turned up with this. I think it's just lovely, really nice kind of finish to it, nothing too crazy going on, but I think after 5 or 10 seconds there, you'd still be reminded you've had a nice mouthful of Three Swallow. But yeah, beautiful. I think the story kind of is probably one of it sounds very romantic, and it's a beautiful story. And the Three Swallow motif would have, decorated most bottle of Powers since the early 1800s, and generally an age signifier. Because obviously in Dublin, when we saw the lovely imagery on screen when Barry was chatting, adult literacy would have been minimal or nil really at the time. So if you had gone to one of the lovely bars across Dublin and you had a whiskey from the back bar, we can't unfortunately read all of this lovely whiskey jargon that we have across the bottle now. So you needed something to call your whiskey, and Powers would have become known at a bar call as a Three Swallow. But regularly, I'm asked at tastings, why Three Swallow, not Three Swallows? We can see Three Swallow birds, and they are Three Swallows. Anyone will see them flying around kind of, to mark that summer occasion. But the Three Swallow motif is, I mentioned John's Lane kind of nods to what the distillery did in their heyday, but the Three Swallow kind of, I guess, takes the workers into account and the way Powers would have felt about their workers. So this distillery on John's Lane, of course, on Thomas Street, as it grew in size, the family's kind of status in society would have, taken a notch, or it would have definitely taken a step or two towards Downton Abbey, that style of lifestyle. And the lovely, I think what's beautiful about the new bottle as well, we've got a picture of the stagecoach and the horse on the back of the bottle. And of course, as Powers would have been invited to all of these lucrative events across Dublin, the mode of transport was, of course, the stagecoach, and the famous Powers horses would have been rolled out from the stables to take them to use Dublin Castle as an example. And 3 employees on board. You had a driver, you had an assistant, and of course you had a weighman at the back, someone that needed to keep an even keel. And one of the first things that was done when they arrived at said party was enough whiskey for 3 Swallow was sent back out to the stagecoach, one for each worker on board to, I guess, keep them warm on nights like this. But a beautiful story, and I think an amazing one to be able to name an expression of whiskey after, and I think it just kind of captures exactly what Powers is about. The stories are endless. You could talk all night, but that's one of the nicer ones in my opinion.
Yeah, it's great having those stories behind the brand.
It's
as you said, the liquid as well.
Definitely helps.
So, yeah,
definitely helps.
So I think we do actually have sorry, Kevin. Yeah.
Just in terms of the Powers, it's a distillate-driven, whiskey, as Catherine was saying, and it's reflected here to drive the distillate forward, and that spiciness and the characteristics of the distillate, which is a special distillate that we produce here in Midleton. We hold back a bit on the wood, on the maturation side, so you pull back a bit on the wood in terms of using, a lot less first fill casks, so we go more refill casks, and that allows the distillate character to express itself, and that's what shines through here. And you mentioned the spiciness there and those particular notes, and that's really what drives it and makes it very, very distinctive.
Yeah,
no, absolutely.
It's lovely. It's so warm, and it's. I think that lovely warm and spice for me, I mentioned, is progressive and nearly kind of soft. Everything's soft and subtle, like that clove oil spice. It's lovely. Yeah, it's sure as a cracker. There's no question about it.
And it's a cold night here as well, so we need 3 Swallows as well.
Yeah,
very welcome.
We need 3 Swallows.
Very welcome.
This is hitting the spot, absolutely. So I think we do have a question that's come in there on the Q&A for you, Derek, from Joseph. So Joseph's asking, do the stone cubes have an impact on the whiskey, and what are they?
I'd say Joseph is probably referring to the whiskey stones versus the lights of. I kind of drink it as is, as it comes straight from the bottle. But I think the only benefit to using the lights of a whiskey stone, it probably will chill the whiskey if that's the way you like it. And of course, there's no wrong way to drink it. And I think the benefit of these whiskey stones is that it obviously won't dilute.
Yeah.
But I haven't used them. I've seen them in lots of lovely gift shops and stuff. But I guess there's no wrong way to do it. I'm not sure how everyone else feels, but
no, I'd agree.
think,
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think on that as well, if you do add a bit of water to it, if you do allow ice to melt into it, it does open up a whole different dimension of flavours and aromas then too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as you say, it's any way to
I
drink
think
it.
there's no wrong way. I think it's naturally chilled this
Yeah.
evening, as we've
I suppose the
kind of
temperature,
established.
the temperature of the whiskey that you drink it with is important.
Yeah.
And it's quite cold here tonight, and the whiskey can be kind of a little bit enclosed.
Yeah.
And by doing that, by adding ice or stone, then it does chill it down a bit. But again, it depends on what way people want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no right way, there's no wrong way. But
course.
for me, I suppose a nice little bit of ambient temperature,
Yeah.
a little bit of heat.
Hand warming it.
You just get the aromas coming off. I think
And of course, it celebrates kind of, I think that tide is rising all ships with whiskey going the way it is, its popularity. And what I've noticed with the likes of an expression like Three Swallow, we've got some, bartenders that are taken to it to, leaning towards premium Irish whiskey to, one cocktail in particular, like the highball has kind of seen this bit of a resurgence again. And we're lucky to see that a couple of bartenders are putting their hands on a bottle of Three Swallow because of those kind of, I guess, fruity, kind of sweet notes. And it's definitely versatile. So it's nice to see it being enjoyed in more capacities than out of these amazing glasses here. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, thanks for that, Derek. That was a beautiful whiskey to continue the tasting. While everyone's, I suppose, savouring that whiskey, we actually caught up with Kevin a little bit earlier this week, who showed us around the Garden Still House here in Midleton. So we're going to now join Kevin in the Garden Still House, and he's going to talk us through how we actually make pot still whiskey here in Midleton. So enjoy.
Hello everyone, greetings from Midleton Distillery. You're all very, very welcome to the tasting this evening for our second drop in the Barrel Club. A special welcome to all the new members of the Barrel Club. We had a wonderful tasting back in September for drop number 1. We had just an incredible evening, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And tonight's going to be equally special, and the focus of tonight is going to be single pot still, the production of single pot still, the history of single pot still, and we have some wonderful whiskies to taste as well. So I'm speaking to you today from just outside the Garden Still House here at Midleton Distillery, just behind me. But I think before we talk about the Garden Still House and the single pot still, let's do a little bit of history first. We have a number of still houses here at Midleton Distillery. I suppose we have to bear reference to the oldest still house, which is in the Heritage Centre. That dates back to 1825, when the Murphy family established Midleton Distillery. And in that still house, the largest pot still in the world, which is about 140,000 litre capacity, that was put in place around 1867. And distillation continues in that old still house right up until the early 70s. And then in 1974-75, we commissioned the new plant here where I'm standing now, and we opened a new still house, and then the old distillery lay silent and has silent to this day. That new still house was commissioned in 75, and I suppose one of the key challenges of that still house was that it had to distill the various distillate types from the Powers Distillery in Dublin, from the Jameson Distillery in Dublin, and also from the Murphy distilleries in Cork. So it had to be very flexible, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. The next still house here, which I'm going to talk about, is just behind me, which we commissioned in 2013 as part of our expansion project. And that's the Garden Still House. And it gets its name basically from, this is the location of the garden, which was part of the distiller's cottage. And people will probably know that from their tours of the Heritage Centre. The distiller's cottage, just at the back of that, it had a beautiful garden, and this is the location of this still house. Then to my right here, just in the background, you see the very large new column still house, again commissioned in 2013, and that's where we produce our grain whisky. And single pot still is the quintessential style of whisky in Ireland, going back over the centuries. It is made from a mixture of malted barley, and then it's triple distilled in copper pot stills, just like the ones you see in the background here. And you produce a distillate about 84% from the final still, the spirit still. And that is reduced in strength then to 63% before it's filled off into a cask. So that is what single pot still whisky is. It's made from barley, malted barley, triple distilled in copper pot stills. The difference really between triple distillation and double distillation is that with triple distillation, we go that extra step. It has a third distillation step, which in our view produces a whisky of extra smoothness, different aromas, different flavours, and a different complexity. And that's what we pride ourselves here in Midleton, producing a triple distilled whisky. Now, suffice to say, we've also done some double distillation. In fact, only recently, we did a rye and malt, which was double distilled in a micro distillery. So we do a bit of playing around with double distillation as well. And that has its own characteristics. It gives you, a different flavour profile, a different taste. But to me, it's just about differences between triple and double. And, neither is better or worse. They just give you a different style of whisky. In terms of producing single pot still whisky, as I mentioned already, it's made from a mash bill of malted barley and barley. This then goes through our brew house, where we produce a sugary wort, which is full of sugars. It's pumped into our fermenters, and then we add yeast. And this is where some of the magic starts. The yeast starts to work on these simple sugars and converts it to alcohol and carbon dioxide. We then produce a wash of about 10% ABV. This wash then is pumped into our first still, which, if you look behind me here on my left-hand side, that's the first step, which is the wash still. And here, it's step one of the distillation process, where we produce low wines from that first step. So the low wines vary in strength, depending on the type of distillate that we're producing, maybe between 22% up to around 40% alcohol. Again, depending on the cuts and depending on the style of distillate that we're producing. Then that low wines is pumped into our next still, which is directly behind me in the center, which is the faint still. And here we distill again, and we produce a heads, a center cut, and a tails. And it's that center cut then that goes forward to our final still, which is to my right here, which is the spirit still. That center cut is pumped into our spirit still, and then it goes through our third distillation run. And once again, we discriminate here. We have our heads, we have a center cut, and we have our tails. And it's that final center cut, it's that heart at about 84% that's pumped into our spirit receivers. And that is our final distillate. And then what we do is we check that distillate. It goes through, strict quality control procedures. When I come in the morning at 7:30 or 7:15, I nose that distillate along with the team here at Midleton to ensure that it is of the highest quality. And following that then, that distillate is reduced down to about 63% with reverse osmosis water, and then it's pumped into cask and it goes off for maturation. So that really is the how we produce single pot still whisky. In terms of complexity and in terms of what I do here in Midleton along with the team, is that we can produce a range of different distillate styles. And we do that a number of ways. The most important way is by adjusting our cuts. That center cut, which is really, really important in getting to the heart of the distillation. If we prolong that cut, if we allow more of the tails in, you get a heavier style of pot still. If we shorten the center cut, you get less of those tails, less of those heavier compounds, and you get a lighter style of distillate. And it's by adjusting those cuts and also adjusting our boil-off rate, our reflux rate, and the volume that we actually put into the still. That's how we play tunes to produce various distillate styles here in Midleton, from a lighter style to a medium style to a heavier traditional style. And that's how we do it.
Okay, folks, so some of you were really paying attention to what Derek was saying a few minutes ago, or maybe you've seen his Instagram earlier on. I know he is Instagram famous, but he dropped a little hint there about the next drop for Barrel Club that some of you have picked up on in the chat. You did hear him correctly. Your next drop is going to consist of a Powers Johns Lane cast strength deconstruction. So that's something amazing to look forward to in the next drop. But Kevin, as we just seen there, it's an impressive operation that you're leading here in Midleton, and I think it's obvious to everyone that you love what you do.
Yeah, it's a very impressive operation here. I'm not sure, people have probably visited the Heritage Centre here and maybe the micro distillery maybe on occasions, but I suppose very few people get to see the main site, the main distillery. But yeah, in terms of the still houses, very, very impressive. Going back to the old site here, which the old pot still, the largest pot still in the world, going back to 1867 installation date. Right up to this micro distillery here, it's just a huge array of different types of stills, and yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing place, really.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned the old still. I mean, we've carried on that tradition of building big, I suppose, the biggest still of all time, the biggest working pot stills, and it's nice that they kind of the equipment hasn't changed a huge amount. You know, it's still a very traditional whiskey in that sense.
Yeah, like the actual pot still, if you look at the pot still, I mean, the shape of the pot still, it's made from copper. The condensers, you know, that is, you know, hasn't really changed over the years. Okay, previously, instead of a condenser, back 100 years ago, they used to use a worm tub. Okay, but the principle is the same in terms of condensing a liquid. But yeah, copper, heat, swan neck, line arm, condenser, the principle is the same. But I suppose what has changed over years is the level of control and automation, what we call SCADA control, which allows us to get really tight control, precision on the distillation, which is really important in producing consistent quality whiskies.
Absolutely. So look, folks, from listening to Kevin, I mean, it's clear that distillate character has a huge effect on the whiskies that we're making here in Midleton. So it would really be great to hear your thoughts at home. I mean, how much do you think the distillate character actually affects the taste of the final whiskey? You know, say on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, there is no prize for this one, but it would be great to hear your thoughts. So please do pop any thoughts into the chat. Also, we are closing the Jameson 21 competition in a minute, so do get your answers in and we'll announce the winner a little bit later. But now, let's move on to our third whiskey. This is Redbreast 12-year-old, the Whiskey Lover's Whiskey. Catherine Condon, welcome.
Thanks, Tommy.
Hope you're well tonight. So you're going to be talking us through Redbreast 12-year-old, but I suppose before we take a sip, can you tell us a little bit about your role with Irish Distillers?
Sure. So my name's Catherine Condon and I'm a distiller here at Midleton Distillery. So I would work closely with Kevin, with Eva, with the blending team and a really large group of people who work up in distilling operations. And I suppose my role as distiller is to work alongside Kevin to ensure that the quality of the distillates produced every day are to the best standard that we can produce. And I suppose it's, you know, we have great gratitude for the people who've gone before us who've laid down such good quality distillate that we're now able to produce really good quality whiskey. So it's our role and responsibility to lay down just as good for the people coming after us.
You're carrying on the tradition. And you've definitely got the best of both worlds. You're here between the micro and the main plant. So
that's it, yeah. So another part of my role then, as Eva has mentioned already, is working down here. And this is where we go to, you know, trial new things, trial the wacky, the weird and the wonderful, and see what works and what doesn't. So it's the best of both worlds, yeah.
This is where you get Kevin worried when you come down here doing all the crazy stuff. Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Well, look, Redbreast is obviously, you know, one of the most highly awarded and biggest selling single pot still whiskies, and I suppose it's pretty clear why.
Absolutely, you know, I think everyone has a soft spot for Redbreast. Every whiskey lover, as you say, it's the whiskey lover's whiskey. But I suppose looking at Redbreast and how it came to be, if we go back to 1887, W&A Gilbey's were wine merchants back then, and they actually were marketing John Jameson's liquid by certifying it on their label. So what they would do as wine merchants, they would import a lot of sherry. So they had ample supply of very good sherry butts. And they would bring their barrels up to John Jameson's distillery by horse and cart. And then they would supply the barrels directly so that John Jameson's distillery would give them the new make distillate. They'd fill it up and bring it back to their own warehouses. And then I suppose how Redbreast came to be, the name Redbreast, Gilbey's would have used lots of different names at the time. So they would have had a whiskey, you know, Grand Castle whiskey by John Jameson's distillery.
It's kind of unique, and you had both names on the bottle.
Both names on the bottle. And then at the time, the chairman of Gilbey's was an avid ornithologist, a bird watcher, and he wanted to name 3 whiskies after his 3 favourite birds, that being the chaffinch, the yellowhammer, and the robin redbreast. And I think the story goes that he was only allowed 1, and so Redbreast won that.
Won out.
Won out that.
And that's what has us here today.
But that's what has us here today. So I suppose if we talk about Redbreast and why it's so special and why it's loved by so many people, there's a lot of different factors in it. The first being that it's a single pot still whiskey, and that's what we're all tasting here tonight, single pot stills. And in that, you know, we've mentioned already, Kevin and Eva have touched on this, the mash bill, and that plays such an important factor in this. The unmalted barley and the malted barley. The unmalted giving you that silky mouthfeel, that creaminess. Mm-hmm. And then I suppose the triple distillation, you know, the fact that it is contact 3 times with with 3 different stills. The copper interaction allows us to remove those heavy notes that, you know, would be there sometimes if depending on cuts, if you're doing a double distillation. And then, of course, if you factor in maturation. And here it's our only age statement whiskey that we're tasting tonight, the 12-year-old. And I'm definitely finding, as you know, I'm getting older, time moves pretty quick. But when you think about 12 years in a barrel, that's a long time.
Yeah, we take it for granted always, don't we? Like, it's amazing to think back, you know, what you were doing 12 years ago. You know,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, actually, you know, if we just think about that, 2009, you know, Barack Obama was inaugurated as the President of the United States.
True.
And we also had very bad floods here in Cork in November of 2009. I think the Lee burst its banks.
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, so it takes us back. But that's something that's lovely about whiskey as well. You know, it can connect us to a point in time and point in history as well.
Mm-hmm.
But then I suppose the most important factor for Redbreast and what makes it so unique is its contribution of the sherry casks. And this again is because they were importing those sherry barrels at that time.
So it's a nice continuation of the story, really.
Absolutely, and it's the DNA in all the Redbreast family. And if you are to nose this,
I mean, the sherry cask jumps out with the...
It does, those beautiful dried fruits, those raisins, those prunes, all come to the fore.
Not just because it's our Christmas drop, but someone described this to me as Christmas cake once, and I've never been able to forget it. You know, it really is
Absolutely,
Christmas cake in a
it's
glass.
the perfect drink to be drinking at
This
Christmas
time,
time
yeah.
as well.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful.
And I suppose this is the link to the cooperage that we work closely with in Jerez, and it's where we source our Oloroso sherry barrels. And Kevin, you would have done a lot of work with Antonio Paez Lobato and the relationship there.
Yeah, I suppose we've a relationship with Antonio Paez for 35 years now. An incredible cooperage, brilliant craftspeople. I suppose my predecessor in maturation, Brenda Monks, would have set up the supply chain probably 35 years ago. And really it was very new at the time to actually get the casks, the sherry butts manufactured by a cooperage in Spain, and then get the bodegas in Jerez to actually season those casks and then bring them back to Midleton. So really we were commissioning our own barrels, which was very, very innovative at the time. We talk about innovation today and micro and all that, but there was lots of innovation going on 30, 35 years ago as well. And we have to thank all those people. But Antonio Paez, yeah, absolutely superb craftspeople. The oak, you know, predominantly would be sort of Spanish Portuguese oak predominantly from Galicia in northwest Spain. Then it makes its way down to Jerez, where the staves are dried. You can imagine the heat in the summer, sort of temperatures up to 40 degrees. So it's all air dried for about 15 months, all the wood. And then they manufacture the casks, and then they send them out to a number of bodegas. For example, Lostau is one example, and Antonio Paez himself has another bodega, where then they're filled with Oloroso sherry for 2 years, and that sherry then seeps into the staves, seeps into the oak. The casks are emptied after 2 years, and then they're brought back to Midleton. And then this interaction goes on between the Spanish oak, the Oloroso sherry, and our whiskey. And this is what you have today.
Yeah, it jumps out of the glass, doesn't it? It's, I suppose you can't make the best whiskey without using the best cask, so it's...
That's it.
That's it. So to taste, Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Christmas in a glass. You get all those beautiful Christmas cake flavours coming through. That spice is beautifully balanced from the pot still distillate. And not to forget as well, the bourbon barrels gives that sweetness as well. So it all marries together just perfectly for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's an unforgettable kind of palate. Yeah, fruity, silky, a little bit spicy.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I suppose Kevin touched on the sourcing of the casks and, you know, what plays into that, you know, sustainability. Of course, not just the wood itself, but the forest as a living, I suppose, ecosystem. And Redbreast has very much kind of got involved in that sort of things with our project Wingman.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic project. Started 2 years ago, and we created Robin Redbreast Day. So that's past this year. It was the 12th of November. And we also got Chris O'Dowd to come on board and help support the cause. So it was a quick video that was done, and it was quite humorous, quite lighthearted. Sure, you've all been, you've met our Redbreast, our Robin Redbreast now. And each time it was viewed, there was a certain amount of money contributed to the charity. And we also have our Redbreast 12 bird feeder. So that's a great initiative as well. So we're hoping to raise around €70,000 from that. And that all goes to BirdLife International, which is a fantastic organisation to make sure that we're keeping the common birds common.
Absolutely. Look, that's a great cause. So, slán everyone.
Cheers.
So, I'm sure we have many Redbreast fans tuning in tonight, and we have got a few questions that have come in. The first one was actually for Eva. So, Eva, this question comes in from John. He says he loves your work, and it's a really interesting story about the micro distillery that we heard earlier. He's just asking, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the innovations that you're planning for 2022?
Yeah, so to date in the micro distillery, since Catherine has been here, right through to myself, there's been a number of innovations that have occurred here in the micro distillery, and most of them are still actually under lock and key in our warehouse just down the way. I only wish I could tell you about some of the stuff that we have in the pipeline. But I know, especially sitting next to this man beside me, he will kill me if I let anything out or reveal anything. So I would just say keep your eyes peeled, because there's some really exciting things that are in the pipeline from the micro distillery. So yeah, stay tuned.
And I mean, with the Ryan malt releasing only a few months ago, I mean, we had an amazing release, not long ago. And the next question is in from Aoife. This one's directed at you, Derek. So Aoife says she loves Tree Swallow. She's just wondering what the inspiration behind the name is. And I suppose, in particular, why was the blue colour on Power's Tree Swallow chosen?
Yeah, I think I probably went into good detail with the tree swallow motif, as I call it. So that nice story. But the new bottle, of course, is that lovely kind of, I guess, teal blue. Anyone that has seen them, I think, teamed together at the bar, they really kind of jump off a back bar. You've got obviously the diamond P for your gold label, silver for John's Lane. And this one here, anyone familiar with some field labour or doing some work in the summer, the swallow bird is always above your head. They're always they break some people's hearts of where they decide to put their nests. But I think one thing we agree on is the way they look in flight. So when they take on a lovely kind of reflection of sun, they do give off a lovely blue hue. So the teal blue label on Power's Tree Swallow is taken from, we'll say, when a swallow bird catches sunlight in flight. So nice kind of story. I think it rounds it out nicely.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Okay, folks. So look, please take a minute to enjoy your Redbreast 12. Now we're going to hear again from Barry Crockett. He's going to tell us about what makes Irish whiskey so unique.
Well, the major aspects to Irish whiskey as a category and what makes it unique in the world of whiskies is the skill and tradition of using high percentages of barley or unmalted barley. So therefore, it's been a tradition in the Irish distilling world going back a very long period of time to use a mixture of malted barley and unmalted barley. And that gives a very unique flavour to the wort, which then transmits itself right through the distilling system into the spirit itself. So you might wonder, what are those flavours that I'm speaking about? What do you get from barley? Well, from barley, one obtains what I would describe flavours of, I would describe them as apple, pear, and sometimes peach type characteristics. And it's particularly coming from the grain. And indeed, depending on the year, whether you're going to have a good harvest or a bad harvest, those flavours can be more or less prevalent. Again, it was part of the skill of the grain buyer to ensure that he purchased the appropriate grain, because you weren't buying grain for the sake of grain, you were buying grain, barley, to give the best outcome in respect of the flavour and the whisky. The second aspect is the question of the actual distillation process. Again, it's been long established in the Irish distilling world that one went through a 3-stage distillation sequence. That meant that even though it was a much more expensive way of distilling, the resulting spirit is distilled to a higher strength. That means that you have a much greater facility to obtain a purer, cleaner, and ultimately sweeter and more balanced type new spirit, which obviously is then added to the third stage, namely the appropriate type of cask or barrel.
So folks, I think Barry's words there really highlight the important role that both our ingredients but also our people play here in the whiskies produced at Midleton. Now, we have a number of questions have come through on the chat, so thanks very much for getting involved, folks. We're going to look at those now. So first from Kenneth. So Kenneth wants to know, how many times a year are the pots emptied, and do you find the wash has an impact on the flavours? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll take it,
Yeah,
yeah.
Katrin?
So because it's a batch distillation, they're actually emptied after each distillation. But maybe what Kenneth's asking here is how many times we actually take them down for maintenance. So we do that in our annual shutdown, which takes place in the summer months. And that's a really fun time for us because it's very quiet in the distillery. We get the pot stills all ready for people to actually enter into the pots. So foresights who have manufactured our pot stills come over and they go into our pot stills and they check the thickness of the copper to make sure everything is still intact. And yeah, so it's a really great time for us to see the other side of it. It also gives the copper this chance to regenerate as well, and allows oxygen in once the copper pots cool down. And then I suppose the question, does it have an impact on the spirit? Definitely, and as Kevin alluded to in the video there, it all depends on the cuts that you make in your wash pot as well. And when I say cuts, what point you decide to finish the distillation. So it definitely does have an impact.
Brilliant, thanks Katrin. Next question is in from Dominic. So what do you do with the tops and tails?
Yeah, so here in the micro distillery, we're very lucky that we get to play around with our cuts here. So our tops and our tails can be recycled into further distillations. Because it's batch to batch, we have our feints and our spirits. So our cuts that we make will be continuously recycled, and it's a really good element in terms of innovation to play around with. So like I mentioned previously, myself and Catherine will be able to actually assess the spirit as it's flowing through the safe, and we can determine that way when we're going to make our cuts, and then for future campaigns, how we're going to assess the campaign we're working with and our composition around our cuts.
Yeah, and I think even the tops, when that comes through the safe, it's a very interesting part of the distillation, because you get these fatty acid esters that come through from the previous distillation.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is a demisting test, and by doing that, we're actually adding water to the spirit, and when you add water and dilute it down, those acids and esters precipitate out of the spirit, and it's only then when they start to disappear we know that the spirit is of good quality to go forward, and that's how we judge our top cut.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And next question from Kevin. What is the oldest whiskey that each of you have had the pleasure of tasting? It's a good one.
Will I start?
Kevin, jump in, yeah.
Kevin to Kevin. I suppose I'd have to talk about our Silent Distillery collection. We have 6 chapters. We've released 2 chapters, one 45-year-old. This year we had a 46-year-old. And we keep going until 2025, when chapter 6, and that'll be the 200th anniversary of the Midleton Distillery from 1825. So I suppose their cask that we have from the old distillery here, going back to the early 70s. It's the last whiskey from the old distillery. It's very, very special whiskey, and I suppose I'm the lucky person really that I get a chance to A, taste these whiskies, and B, I suppose present them to the world. And I suppose they're the whiskies that we're working on at the moment.
It's one of the perks of being master distiller, I suppose.
Well, with chapter 1 to 6, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, folks, so we've seen Barry Crockett talking again a few minutes ago, and again, he highlighted the role that the people play in Midleton. Kevin, you had the pleasure of working with Barry. I suppose, what was he like to work with?
Yeah, I joined in 1998, Tommy, and it was May 1998, and I remember the first time I met Barry actually was a job interview just outside a hotel just outside Dublin, actually. I was working in Dublin at the time, and I did an interview with Barry, and so I was nervous, A, because I was doing an interview, and B, well, Barry Crockett,
Darth Cook as well. Yeah,
a legend of the Irish whiskey,
Yeah.
was actually across the table. So if things weren't hard enough. But anyway, I didn't make a complete mess of it, obviously. So,
No, clearly, yeah.
I got the job as a distiller in Midleton, working for Barry. And I remember the first day arriving, it was May 1998. And, I would have known some bit about Midleton Distillery, but I suppose what I didn't realise was the scale of the operation. And I remember Barry, he was very good to me from day one. I remember he gave me a tour. The first stop really was the actual, what we now call the Barry Crockett Stillhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just the scale of the operation and the pot stills and the copper and the noise and the aromas, and Barry explaining the whole thing. And I didn't really understand my very first day, but then we went to the warehouse with Barry and talked about maturation, and again the aromas and the smells and the vanilla and the toasted wood. But that was my first, meetings with Barry.
Mm-hmm.
But a gentleman, extremely knowledgeable, and I'm still talking to Barry on a regular basis. I was only talking to him there maybe 2 weeks ago. He's very, very helpful to me in my role now. He knows a huge amount of history, the process, and I suppose any question I have, he always helps me out. Particularly now with Silent Distillery and the history behind the old distillery, he just knows it. He's an incredible knowledge.
Yeah.
And I suppose in terms of work, he was, really precise, accurate, and I suppose that precision and accuracy is so important, and it has filtered down to all of us working in the distillery, and it's so important. If you're going to produce consistently good quality whiskies, you need precision, you need quality, you need craft.
Yeah.
And that's what he showed me in a way.
And obviously we're, I suppose, here specifically focusing on pot still whiskey tonight. I mean, in a sense, in modern times anyway, Barry's the reason why we're here able to taste these amazing pot stills. He kept the style alive, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of single pot still, I mean, after probably the 1930s, all that you'd left was Green Spot and Redbreast. They were the last two standing, really, right up into the the 90s effectively. And Barry, he kept that flag going when times were difficult. Investment, very hard time for the Irish whiskey industry, particularly in the 50s and 60s when distilleries were shutting down, and Midleton was probably only running a few weeks of the year. And I suppose we're very lucky, all of us today, and everybody working in the whiskey industry, where we are today. And it's thanks to people like Barry Crockett that got us here.
Absolutely. And I suppose, as you mentioned, it kept us going through the tough times, and thankfully we've seen a resurgence, in demand and enjoyment of Irish whiskey, and particularly in the last 10 years, I suppose, we've been able to really expand the pot still range, which I suppose is a nice introduction to the next whiskey we're going to try tonight. So, the Midleton Very Rare Barry Crockett Legacy. Yeah,
that leads us on nicely, I suppose. I suppose for me, an important date in the calendar was back in 2011, when we actually introduced Barry Crockett Legacy. And I suppose we repackaged, it was a kind of a reintroduction of single pot still whiskey to the world. We had a special launch down in Midleton. We brought in Powers John's Lane, which was a new single pot still. We brought in Barry Crockett Legacy. And we also did a lot of repackaging around the Spot range and the Redbreast range as well. So it got really a lift, and it sort of showcased what single pot still was about. So it was a very important date. It was the end of April. The reason I remember it was my daughter was born, Shifra, on April the 30th, so I actually missed the launch. That's why I remember.
That is excusable, just in that case, I suppose.
That's why I remember it distinctly. And it was, I think, a very, very important date.
Yeah, amazing to think it was only 10 years ago. I mean, how far things have come since then.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose this whiskey then was introduced. And really, I suppose it's a tribute to Barry Crockett and the work he's done over the years. It's a very special whiskey. I mean, he's his name on the bottle. And I suppose in terms of the whiskey itself and putting it together and what it's made up from, first of all, it's part of the Midleton Very Rare family. And in that, it's all American oak, all American barrels. So in this, we have American barrels, but we also have a little touch of what we call virgin American barrels. These are unseasoned American oak, new oak that we get from Kelvin Cooperage. So there's a lovely contribution of new American oak in Barry Crockett Legacy. Then the rest of the American barrels are what we called B1s or first fills and some refills. So what happens with the American barrels, we import a significant volume of American barrels every year from Kentucky and Tennessee. They've already been seasoned with bourbon or Tennessee. We take them to Midleton, and a B1 is the first time we use it, a B2 second time, and a B3, and then we dispose of the cask. So I suppose Barry Crockett legacy, Midleton is all about American barrels, okay? This is a single pot still whiskey, so it has the range of single pot still styles. Barry was a huge fan of, single pot still. So we've lighter style, we've a medium style, we've a trad style, and this one has a combination of those 3 different styles coming together as a single pot still whiskey.
So it really shows off the craft of the distiller.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we'll do is we'll have a nose. Now this is 46%, okay? So initially on the nose, for me, that contribution of the American oak, particularly the virgin American oak, in terms of the vanilla, a little touch of butterscotch and toffee, almost kind of milk chocolate coming through, and that's coming through from that American oak. And then that single pot still, I suppose, spiciness is there, a little touch, but it also has lovely fruit. It's like maybe citrus, a little bit of lime,
Definitely.
kind of kiwi.
Yeah.
It's very, very fragrant. Okay, and like the Midleton range in general, it's very elegant.
Yeah.
It's lots of finesse. It's a little touch of maybe floral notes as well. It's absolutely wonderful nose.
They're really complex, isn't it?
It's very complex, very layered, lovely.
And I think
And there's some whiskies in this, up to 24, 25 years old.
Okay, yeah.
So there's some very old whiskies, even though it's a non-age statement. There's some very old whiskies in Barry Crockett legacy. So it's amazing. Sorry, Catherine.
I just think it goes to show, single pot still is so diverse. If we, after tasting Redbreast, Powers, the chestnut, this is so delicate and elegant, and it just shows the diversity of single pot still by playing around with barrels.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we'll have a taste.
Yeah.
So, Sláinte.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So 46%. Lovely, peppery and spicy on the taste. If you get that, maybe a bit of pepper, but certainly rolls around. You get some creaminess. Again, Catherine mentioned earlier on that sort of contribution of the unmalted barley gives you that creaminess, that mouthfeel, which is really distinctive in single pot still. Has the fruit, again, that citrus fruit, that sort of maybe mandarin, a little touch of orange peel comes through on the taste. Very, very good. And again, very long lasting.
So it's a long finish, isn't it? Yeah.
Very long finish, yeah.
Really lingers.
So hope people enjoyed it. Look, we're very proud of it. And I know Barry is very, very proud of this whiskey as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Great testament to the man, absolutely.
Yeah.
So look, we've got a few more questions in the chat there, folks. Next one is from Brian. For a standard release like Redbreast 12, do you have selected mash bills made per year to meet the blend requirements, or is it a different cask blend mix every year? Catherine, maybe do you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, well, I suppose for Redbreast and the Redbreast family, we'd make a certain type of distillate. So in the distillery, we'd make 3 different types of single pot still distillate. We'd make a medium, a light, and a heavy. So to this question, the formulation is always the same, so we wouldn't ever play with that. That's the recipe, and that's been there since the very start. But then maybe to the cask element, Kevin, if you want to take up that.
Yeah, so what we do, for example, with Redbreast 12, as Catherine said, we produce different styles of pot still whiskey, and so from week to week we could be doing different styles. They're then all filled into different casks, be it American oak, be it Oloroso sherry, be it Madeira, whatever it is. So we have a formulation that we work to, and at the beginning of the year, our financial year, which is 1st of July. We lay out our production plan for the year, how much of grain we're going to produce, the different types of grain, how much pot we're going to produce, the different types of pot, and then we work out how many different types of casks we need to fulfill that formulation. And that's how we actually fill it off. And then they're filled off into the warehouse. And then after the years, for example, 12 years, we basically do a picking list as per our formulation. We pull together the collection of casks as per the formulation for Redbreast 12. So you'd have American barrels, you'd have, predominantly first fills, you'd have Oloroso sherry, and we disgorge those together, and that then would give us our Redbreast single pot still.
Yeah.
And that's effectively how it works.
Brilliant, thanks.
Hopefully that's not confusing everybody.
No, that sounds good, yeah. And Catherine, you're very popular tonight because I think this one is directed to you from Kenneth. Which is better, the 12-year or the 21-year Redbreast, in your opinion?
Oh, very, very difficult question to answer. I suppose the 12-year-old has such a great balance in it, but the 21-year-old has that beautiful antiqueness to it. We were only tasting it at the start of the week, and the maturation time in that is so special as well. So it's very hard to answer. I guess it just depends for me on the time and the place. For Christmas now, any of the Redbreasts are lovely to be drinking by a fire. They're warming, they're enticing, but it definitely just depends on the time, the mood, if you're with friends or if you're with family. For me, it's too hard to pick. Sorry, Kenneth.
Yeah, that was a good diplomatic answer there. Next question then for yourself, Kevin, is from Brian. So how important is the Dungorney River water in the production of the whiskies?
Yeah, I suppose if you go back in history, that's the first reason why, one of the reasons why the Murphy family would have selected this site. Number one, it had an ample supply of water via the Dungorney River, which, first of all, water for the process of making the whiskey, and secondly, water to power the water wheel, which is just not far away from here. And as well as that, then there was ample supply of barley in the East Cork, Waterford, South Tip region as well. So that's why the Murphy family would have picked it originally. So Dungorney River would have played a huge part right down through the years. And to this day, we still use, water from the Dungorney River. And again, it plays a very, very important part in our whole process. So yeah, Dungorney River, I suppose it's a key part of the history of Midleton going back to 1825 right down to this day, and we still use that river water.
Changed, yeah. So we're lucky to have the grain and the water on our doorstep.
That's it.
Okay, folks, and back to yourselves. I mentioned at the top of the show about the inclusion of the Jameson 21 years sample. It's a very special treat. That was actually a little gift from Kevin for Christmas, so sound man, Kevin. So Kevin, it was released, I suppose, via an online ballot earlier this year. It's a blend of, obviously rare pot still whiskies, but also of some really rare single grain whiskies. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just maybe before I do that, I was laughing earlier on. Catherine said she was doing Redbreast 12 and she was feeling she was getting old. Well, this is kind of more my vintage. Redbreast 21 or Jameson 21. It's more my vintage.
We won't ask you what you were doing when this was. Sorry.
Well, I was working in Midleton, so the Jameson 21, look, it's a very special, and look, we're delighted to include this in the pack for everybody. It's a special, I suppose, gift for everybody in the Barrel Club. And again, I suppose, just to reiterate, special mention to all the new members of the club as well. And we had a great night back in September, and tonight was fantastic as well. It's just great to have people, and looking forward to the next drop in March. So this Jameson 21, so effectively it's a blend of our very best single pot still whiskies and grain whiskies. And they spent the first part of their life, about 18 years, maturing in a mixture of American barrels and Oloroso sherry. And then what we do is, after about 18 years, we put that mixture together and we recask it into American first fill barrels, into what we call B1s, first use. And we left them there for about 3 years, okay? Then we emptied that, and what we did then was we add a nice volume of Oloroso sherry to that final blend, okay, which gives us our beautiful Jameson 21. This is cask strength, so I think this is 57%. So I suppose an amazing journey over 21 years. Begins at life, you have American oak, you have Oloroso sherry, it's recasted into first fill American barrels for 3 years. Then it's emptied, and you get this sort of addition at the end of some Oloroso sherry barrels, just to give it that touch of those Oloroso sherry flavours. And here we are with Jameson 21. So we just have a nose.
God, that nose is
It's very distinctive,
unbelievable.
isn't it?
My
It's
God.
incredible.
Yeah, it's really distinctive, yeah.
Yeah. So again, grain and pot, you have the sort of both of those coming together. Say from the pot side, you have the spiciness, it's robust. You have the fruit, and then from the grain, you have that lovely vanilla,
Fragrant
butterscotch. It's
Yeah.
very, very fragrant. It's really, really good. So I suppose what we'll do is before we have a taste, we just have a little maybe toast to everybody. The year is coming to an end, 2021, and I suppose here really is to the end of 2021. It was a tough year in lots of ways, but you know what? Here's to 2022, and
Cheers. Yeah.
here's to another great year next year.
Cheers.
Launch, everybody.
Launch it.
It's beautiful.
Oh,
Yeah. Burst of flavour.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does kind of burst, doesn't it? It's beautiful.
I think there's a fruit burst there, really.
there is.
And, sort of ripe fruit. Yeah.
Yeah, like melon or something
Yeah. Really good.
It
Yeah.
hits you at once, doesn't it?
Yeah. The cast
So-
strength as well, it packs a punch.
Yeah.
Thanks a bunch. But I think for people at home, though, even at 57%, if you didn't tell people the strength, I don't
Yeah.
think they would have
Yeah.
guessed
It's very
Yeah.
true.
No.
Like
Yeah.
57, they wouldn't. I mean, it's so, mouth coating. It's smooth. It has. I know people say smooth, that word, but it is very, very
It is,
smooth
yeah.
at that strength.
Really luscious as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose obviously our focus is single pot still tonight, but I mean, we can never forget about the amazing blends. I mean, obviously the addition of the grain whiskey, very important as well.
Yeah, and again, like I'm a big fan of grain whiskey and what it does, particularly when it's in good American oak barrels, and that sort of flavour that it gives. It plays a huge role in what we do here in Midleton. So yeah, tonight is all about single pot still, but I suppose it's a nice little touch as well to mention grain right at the end.
Actually, just on that note, a question came in there. Would you recommend that cask strength be enjoyed neat or with a few drops of water to open it up, or is it again down to personal?
Down to
taste?
personal, but I mean, certain whiskies I would say probably are suited to maybe adding a little touch of water. What I would say to people is, nose it and appreciate it at cask strength. For this one's a 57. Get a feel for it. Add a little touch of water, right? And it tends to open up a whiskey. It may become more floral. You may get more vanilla notes or butterscotch or whatever, and enjoy it. And then have a second one, and you can leave out the water if you want. Then
Yeah. So anyway.
so it really depends what way you want it. But a little touch of water is nice.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. So we have a few more questions have come in there. So one from Ben. With whiskey flavours more open at room temperature, when you try cask samples from a cold warehouse, would you taste and assess when at room temperature or cold?
Yeah, good, very good question. So what we do is we would take lots of samples in warehouse. In fact, we'd have probably 1 to 2 people sampling every day. So they take the sample, and this time of the year, as you can imagine, the temperatures are very cold. I mean, you could have whiskey in warehouse at 5-6 degrees or less. So we would, what we do is those samples would be brought to our laboratory area, our tasting area. They'd be left there for maybe a day, 2 days, 3 days, and that would allow them to come back up to room temperature, because that's really when you want to assess and nose the whiskey. When whiskey is very cold, like in a warehouse, it tends to be very closed in.
Yeah.
And what you could do is you can heat it up in the cup of your hands like that, just to get it heated up a bit. But certainly in Midleton, for assessing whiskies, which we do every day, it would be sort of room temperature.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. So another question that's come through. Where in the process does filtration occur, and what is the difference between non-chill and chill filtration?
Yeah.
Anyone want to take that on? Or
I can do that if you want.
again? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of filtration, first of all, when we disgorge the cask, when we empty the cask out, that's stage 1 filtration. And that's where we take out a lot of the charcoal. So when you empty a cask, you're going to get a lot of the loose charcoal material. So the inside of a cask, if you imagine, has already been charred. And over the years of maturation, a lot of this will actually fall down to the bottom.
Yeah.
So therefore, when you empty the cask, you're going to get charcoal, and you need to filter that out. So that's stage 1. Get out as much charcoal as you possibly can. So then what happens for certain whiskies, we may put it through chill filtration. And what that does, basically you cool down a whiskey to maybe 1-2 degrees Celsius, depending. and then that goes through a filtration. And that basically is really, really important because of the cold temperature. A lot of those fatty acids and esters would drop out, and then you actually filter them out. However, if you go higher strength in whiskey, say 46 for example, that because of that higher strength, those fatty acids and esters will not drop out, right? So you don't have to chill filter. So if you go higher strength, that reduces the importance of chill filtration. And the classic example here would be, say, 46%. There's no need to chill filter. Whereas at 40%, you're on that threshold where you could form hazes, so chill filtration is important.
Brilliant.
And I suppose it doesn't affect the flavour in it, but maybe for someone drinking it in a cold environment, they might think, oh, is there something up with the whiskey? But it actually doesn't affect the flavour of the whiskey at all.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on a roll with you again, Kevin. Michael O'Neill is asking, this is going to be a very tough one now. Do you have a favourite amongst the Midleton very rare vintages? Is there one year you can pick it out as a favourite?
Oh, 2021.
I was going.
That wasn't that hard for you.
As soon as I said it, I should have known. Yeah, 2021. Well, that's your question answered, Mike. Another one here. I'm going to throw this one to Derek. Derek, what whiskey would you recommend to give as a Christmas gift? This is probably another silly question, but
Powers John's Lancaster in one of them Barrel Club boxes, of course.
yeah.
Well, what else are you going to... no, genuinely, I think Powers John's Lane is a lovely, lovely gift. I think the new presentation is lovely as well, but there's so many gift ideas around whiskey. I think at Christmas time, they all kind of come out to play. But of course, I'm going to remain very biased and say that a John's Lane will satisfy most of the whiskey lovers,
absolutely.
I think.
Well, I'm going to keep this fair. I'm going to put that question to everyone. So, Catherine, if you were to pick one as a Christmas gift.
Well, I'd have to say Redbreast because of it having all those Christmas attributes in it. Yeah, definitely Redbreast.
Kevin, are you just sticking with your last answer again here? Or?
Midleton Rare 21. If you can get it.
Yeah. And Eva?
I'm going to say Catherine's answer as well, Redbreast 12-year-old. I know for myself at Christmas, my granddad always had a bottle of it on the table, so I really resonate with the brand, so I just love it. So, yeah, I'd have to say Redbreast 12-year-old.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Okay, folks. So earlier on, if you can remember back, Eva asked you to guess the volume of distillate produced here in the micro distillery from very specifically January 1st to November 30th, 2021 in litres of alcohol. Thanks so much to everyone for getting involved and guessing. So I have the winner here. Eva, can you tell us what the correct answer is, first of all, please?
Yes. So the correct answer is a grand total of 11,251.5 litres of alcohol have been produced here in the micro distillery to date.
To be fair.
This year, So it just shows you how small it is in comparison.
If anyone had got that on the button, we would have been very suspicious, to be fair. So we're going to go with closest answer. And I'm very happy to say that the winner tonight with a guess of 10,002 litres is Gavin Gilsenan. So Gavin, congratulations. There is going to be a bottle of Jameson 21-year-old on the way to yourself, so you can enjoy that for Christmas. So well done. Okay, folks, so look, that more or less wraps up our tasting for this evening. So thanks for tuning in. And of course, a really big cheers to Eva, Kevin, Catherine and Derek for joining us. I know you gave up your late night Thursday Christmas shopping, which you'd normally be doing. So thanks for joining us tonight. And folks, look, our aim with the Barrel Club is to remind you of the old favourites when it comes to whiskey from Midleton Distillery, but also hopefully to introduce you to some new whiskies on the way. And we really hope you enjoyed it, as much as we have. Hopefully you've discovered maybe a new favourite whiskey, or at least, you've learned something about pot still distillation. Our next virtual tasting will be in March, back with Derek, as we mentioned earlier on. That's a really, really nice one to look forward to. We're going to be tasting Powers John's Lane Cask Strength Limited Edition. And that's being bottled exclusively for you, our Barrel Club members. So that's something really, really exciting. So look, we look forward to seeing you again then. In the meantime, we're wishing you and your loved ones a happy Christmas. So, slánte and good evening.
Slánte.
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 Luncheon.